Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Josh Neighbors here for the Locked On Big 12 podcast, and joining me tonight it is Stephen Simcox of Locked On Horned Frogs. If you are unfamiliar with the show, you're new to this, we do a roundtable with Linda Godfrey of Locked On Pokes, Jacob Hatch of Locked On Cougars, John Williams of Locked On Sooners, and also Stephen is there as well, and we do a roundtable, and part of that is TCU Corner. And it's been a funny bit for most of the season that we've been doing. But I really think, today we can laugh at this some. We have to dive into it. So Matt Wells was fired today at Texas Tech, which it felt like a little bit earlier than we thought, but it came. And the other coach, it feels like, who's really on the hot seat right now is Gary Patterson, which is weird to say because it felt like this was going to be the turnaround year. A lot of people preseason thought they should have been in the top 25. And I think we'll just start here, Stephen. Do you think the firing of Matt Wells puts more pressure, but kind of puts the microscope more on TCU because that feels like it's the next shoe to drop in that category?
Microscope's probably a good word. Yeah, the Matt Wells thing is fascinating. I mean, I think you got a couple names out there that seem like no-brainers, and Sonny Dykes at SMU and Jeff Traylor at UTSA, who's doing a great job there down in
We lost him. Got him right back. Keep going ahead.
Okay. And Jeff Traylor down in San Antonio, who has some really good ties to the Texas high school football community, being a former Texas high school football head coach. So I imagine a big part of this is trying to zero in on those guys. I don't get the impression that Sonny Cumbie is really a viable candidate, even though he's going to be in the interim for the last 4 games. But, man, the TCU situation – I was there on Saturday when they played West Virginia, and it's always been a struggle with TCU in attendance because they have a 40,000 seat stadium, and they really don't have the student body to support that. So even when they're good, there's usually complaints about empty seats, and it can be kind of a country club crowd that likes to tailgate and might not get there right as kickoff starts, but I mean, at 6:30, it's a night game, and that's not something that TCU gets very often because of who they are and because they haven't been good lately. It was great weather. It was still – I think there was a pocket of the fan base that still thought, okay, the schedule's about to soften up. They're 3-3. They could maybe go on a run here and win, 7 or 8 games. And they just got whipped, by a bad West Virginia team. And Neil Brown is now 3-0 against the Frogs. There was a moment in that game that I think kind of spelled out who they've been the last 4 years. They had 4th and goal at the 2, and they were down 20-14. And there's about 30 seconds left in the first half, Josh. And you think, okay, you wind the clock down, you call timeout, and then you go for it. And if you score, you're up 21-20 at halftime. Gary was planning on doing that, and he came out of the timeout. And West Virginia called timeout. And then after that timeout, he sent his field goal unit out there. And they kicked it, and they made it a 3-point game. And, the offense didn't score in the second half. So it probably didn't even matter in the grand scheme of things. But you could just feel the air in the stadium, what little was there, just completely leave. And after the game, he said – after the game, in the quote, he said, well, what happened was we had a play that we liked, and we knew they weren't going to line up correctly. They called timeout. We decided they knew what we were going to do, so then we kicked a field goal. And I'm just like, why do you only have one play for a 4th and goal from the 2? You can run another play. I don't understand it. But I feel like what it really is, it's emblematic of a coach who still wants to play like a conservative style and trust his defense, but his defense is bad now, and they can't hold up there into the bargain, and he's not used to coaching in shootouts. So it's all culminated in this really kind of bad cocktail. And we can get into more particulars about sort of where the fan base is, but I think the people that are in the bleachers on Saturday, I would say we're probably at a higher point than we ever have been before, of folks that are either like he's got to go, or at least they're saying, you know, we don't want to fire him, but if he decided after this season it was time to retire, that would be fantastic.
I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and just trying to think about this situation because it's a pretty, it's not one that's totally, it's not unique, but it's pretty rare in college football to have a guy with this much longevity, right? It's pretty rare to have a guy who's this long in as Gary Patterson is. What it reminds me of is this. As somebody who has worked in the combat sports space, a lot of times there are guys who get older, who were guys who were championship level fighters, and they lose one or they lose two, they lose three in a row, but they show a glimpse, a little bit of what they were at some point, and they try to convince you, and they try to convince others in the media, and they try to convince themselves that they can still retain what they had. And that kind of leads me to this of where he has been and where they are going. Look at all those conference, contendership times. Look at all those double-digit win seasons they've had. Look at the number of times that they've had a nice rebound. Look at the way that he's coached. He's been such a spectacular coach. And the problem for him is he has set the standard. It's the issue. Is like there was no standard before him at TCU. He has set the standard. He is no longer coming close to living up to that standard. Not even close to that. And once again, I point again to these wins here, these records recently. 7-6 is tenable after 11-3. There's some attrition, but 5-7 to follow that, 6-4 after that, and a 3-4 after that. This is not getting any better. He is 61 years old. This is the worst defense he has ever had. He can tell us as much as he wants, and I know he's been saying this, that he's got a good pulse in this, and nobody's going to work harder than him to turn it around. That's fine. He can say that. But there has to be some accountability to the standard that you set. You know what I mean? There's got to be some realization that, hey, you've done such a great job, and we know we can compete for conference titles here, especially. And I made this case for Texas Tech too. Like, they had to make a choice that in a changing Big 12 conference, how do they want to set themselves up for when that change happened? Because I know this for a fact, Oklahoma and Texas do not want to be here next year. They want to get out as soon as possible. So when that shift changes and there's, when we see new teams coming in, TCU, in my opinion, I believe you think the same thing, they should be in a position where they usually do recruiting-wise and what they have done performance-wise, where they can maybe not every single year, but pretty often be contending for Big 12 championships because they're in Texas. They have been a really good recruiting team. They've had top 25 classes. And this goes also to the point of maybe, it's time, not lately. The last couple classes last class was not good. And this class coming up, I know it's not fully formed yet, but it's not one of the better classes that Gary Patterson's brought in. All the signs are pointing in one direction. And I know his goose is not cooked yet. But my thing is, like, don't let this get bad. Do not let it get bad. Do not let it get sad. Do not let it get to where David Cutcliffe essentially is right now at Duke. Like, I think that's the worst case scenario. I know TC is a lot better, but I think, I think there are some tough choices that have to be made, and that was a horrible loss. The West Virginia loss was an absolutely horrible loss for them.
It was, and that was a good graphic. The other time that there was really any significant talk about something like this was back in 2013. Their first couple of years in the Big 12, as you see there, and they go 7-6 and then 4-8. But it wasn't even really talk about moving on from Gary. It was more just, okay, maybe they can't compete in the Big 12. Like, maybe they just bit off more than they can chew in that regard. But then you saw the turnaround, 12-1, 11-2. You had a 6-7 season, but then you bounced back with 11-3. And he did something in that time. He innovated a little bit. Like, he brought on Sonny Cumbie and Doug Meacham, and he went to more of an air raid style. And he got a little faster on defense and changed the way he recruited. And that led to some wins and some great results. The problem now is we're in year 4 of this, and I'm not seeing any indication of change. And as you said, it's getting worse. And one reason the Tech hire is pivotal to me, because you mentioned the recruiting aspect. And I think that is a big key. And I'm not sure if there has been – I mean, I know Texas Tech has struggled since Mike Leach left in general, but I don't know if there's been a worse thing for them than TCU becoming a Power 5 team, because there is a huge alumni base of Tech people in the Metroplex. Like it's not close to Lubbock, but it's about as close as you can get to a major metro area. So there was a great feeder system there for a long time of Dallas Fort Worth players who, okay, you had SMU and TCU. If you didn't want to go there, you wanted to play in the Big 12, you could just slide on down to Lubbock and you play at Texas Tech. And that's sort of been broken up by what TCU has done. And it's if you look at, the decade they've been in the league, it's one of the schools that he's really dominated. Like he's had a lot of success against Tech. He's really kind of established himself against Baylor, Kansas, as everybody else has, and then Texas. Well, the tide's already kind of turning, I think, at UT. Like Steve Sarkisian's doing a nice job. They beat TCU this year. We'll see what happens in the Baylor game this year, but I think so much of that had to do with just the musical chairs they've had at head coach, and they look better than they have. Even that this team even looks better to me than that 2019 team did in some ways, because that team always played close games. So if Texas Tech kind of figures something out, well, then that's another school that theoretically kind of jumps ahead of you in the,
they should beat Texas Tech. Like they should be consistently beating Texas Tech. They did this year, which is great, but like that's the bare minimum. Like that's what you should, like you talked about, like they have that advantage of being in the Metroplex, whereas Lubbock is like 5 hours out of the way and they need to be that air raid team. Like TCU doesn't have to do that. They can be a defensively sound football team that can play to its offensive personnel strengths to win games. I think that's what TCU football should be. I mean, I know Gary wants to run the football, but like, let's be honest, right now they can do that. But I mean, they got a pretty decent passing offense too. But like, that's what I'm saying is like, hey, Quentin Johnston's awesome. Let's make sure he gets the ball a bunch. They're doing a great job of that. They're doing a really good job of that. The problem is Gary's unit, the defense, is hapless. West Virginia's offense is horrible. They are horrible. Letty Brown's very good, but their offensive line's not very good. They torched them up and down the field all game long. Now TCU got a couple nice stops where they held them to 3 as opposed to 6. But to me, it's like the signs are there, and that's why that's why it's one of those things where sure he's earned some pedigree, and sure it's not like it's 3-9, right? But look at the rest of the schedule,
it might be.
man. Look at the rest of the schedule. The schedule's not. They have Kansas left. They've got at Kansas State this week, and that's
they're not favored right now.
Yeah, it's gonna be a toss-up game. Yeah, it's a toss-up game, and I would favor Kansas State at home against TCU the way they've looked. They're home for Baylor. Baylor is a better coached football team right now. They're more efficient. They're straight up good in a way that TCU is not. They're at Oklahoma State, which is essentially what TCU aspires to be, right? They run the football and they play awesome defense. And they're still also at Iowa State this year. So sure, they might collect 2 more wins, but they're not going to a bowl game. Like that's not going to happen for them this year. And to point to this graphic one more time, Stephen, look since 2010, and go back to 2009. Fiesta, Rose, Poinsettia, Peach, Alamo twice. Like these are awesome bowl games. They're nowhere near that right now. They're nowhere near it. Their last bowl game was the Cheez-It Bowl appearance against Cal.
It was. I mean, they qualified for the Texas Bowl last year, but they couldn't play with the COVID issues.
Yes.
So you're staring at 2 of the last 3 seasons where you haven't gotten to bowl eligible, and really 3 seasons in a row where you haven't made a bowl game. And any other, Power 5 program, I think, in the country, that results in your head coach getting, his walking papers. So that's the thing I would say for people to watch over the next few weeks, because as you know, Josh, the key here is, what do the folks with the money think? And, one thing that Gary has done really well is he has pleased those people for a long time. And obviously a lot of them are older. They saw TCU through a lot of dark times. So him getting the Frogs to the Big 12 and doing what he's done is amazing to them, and they never thought it would happen. And honestly, like, I think in their mind, their ideal situation would be, okay, could he kind of limp his way to 2023 and do well enough that we could be a viable program, send him off the right way, and then transition into a new era. And I mean, even as of last year, I would have said that probably is possible just because they were still putting up 6 or 7 wins a season. But man, you're right. Like they're gonna be favored in one more game this year, and that's the Kansas game.
Mhm.
Like I think 4-8 is probably most likely right now. 5-7 maybe. I don't see 6-6 at all. And you can't like even no matter what he's done amazing things. Like I can't understate what he's done. You
Right.
can't let your program, especially in a pivotal time right now where the landscape is changing, new teams are coming in the Big 12. There's still the possibility of what does expansion look like around the country. You can't suddenly become the afterthought in Fort Worth that has 4-8 or 5-7 seasons for a few years and plays in front of half empty stadiums at 11 o'clock. Because one, I mean, that might tank. Like, I still think this is a good job. They invest really well. There's good resources. You're in a metropolitan area. Like
You're in Texas.
Yes. And
you're in Texas in Dallas. I mean, near Dallas.
In 2021, that's an attractive job. In 2023 or 2024, if you're coming off your third losing season, it's a much different situation. So I think that's where the boosters are on October 25th or 26th, whenever you're listening to this. They'd still like to see him find a way to get through the rest of his contract. But if it keeps going like this, I think it has to change because I just feel like their hands can be forced. And that's why, privately, like it's got to go one way or the other in my mind. Like either you turn it around in a hurry,
Right.
and that's the best thing long term, or the best thing long term is honestly you just kind of bottom out over the next few weeks and it becomes obvious that a decision has to be made because you can't keep rolling like this.
Yeah, he's gonna get the chance to close out the season, right? Like that's 110% going to happen. The big question for me is, is this offseason, are you willing to make that change? Are you willing to say, like, are you willing to look at yourselves and say, we're TCU, we have a great pedigree, we can make all the, we can go as far as Gary has taken us before. It's predicated on us making a change to make sure that in a changing Big 12, as we said, we're going to have that opportunity. And they got to pay attention to all the factors. I hear it's a busy time in the Simcox household right now. But the last thing I want to touch on is how he's handled it. Like, he has not handled this year well at the podium. And I think in addition to the results, like, this is part of what is an indicator it's time for him to go, is that, like, your good friend Matt Jennings, you have do podcasts with sometimes. Like, the fact that he's just offhand referencing that article at a press conference and has complained about, the number of carries that Bijan Robinson got and just all the things he's, saying he's going to sue, whatever. Like, this guy's mind is, it's always, we've always allowed the funny uncle, the wacky Uncle Gary thing, but it's hitting a point now where it's not saying he's senile or old, but like it's clear to me he's not really fit to keep leading this program moving forward. The results are not there to his standard before, and also I don't think publicly he's just taking this stuff very well. He's kind of embarrassing himself, tripping over himself in public sometimes with some of this stuff. And I think it's another indicator. Like, sure, give him the rest of the year, but let him go out. Let him go out before this gets really, really bad. Because 4-8, it's really bad for TCU. It's really bad for TCU.
The PR stuff, I think the most damning thing about it to me is that for a while it seemed like that stuff kind of motivated him. And I don't know if it motivated the team, Josh, but it at least was like they would come out and they would feed off it a little bit. And I thought before that SMU game, SMU was talking trash and there was a big lead up to the Iron Skillet. And I remember his press conference that Tuesday, he was really just like not having it. Like he was short with his answers. He was kind of terse with the media. And I said on the podcast, I was like, man, I feel like they're going to come out and win by like 30 points. Like he seems fired up, motivated. It didn't happen, like he said all that stuff about Bijan and Zach Evans. It didn't change anything. He's gone after Matt for the firing article. That hasn't seemed to move the needle at all. And you mentioned the really talented guys on the team, Quentin Johnson and Zach Evans. Like the transfer portal's a thing. And if you're 4-8 and those guys have potentially one more season before they go to the NFL, do they want to sit through that again if they have an opportunity to go to a contender or a place where they get more playing time and actually win some games. That's something you have to factor in. The he's never been great at the out front PR stuff, and it's still like the Metroplex is a pro sports area. It's still a relatively small media contingent that covers him, but he finds a way to get national headlines every week because he says something that's just.
I mean, he blocked you on Twitter, which is like
Yeah, he blocked me on Twitter. Like he hears everything, and I think that's part of that weird mentality that some athletes have, where it's like I'm going to use everything as a slight and it's motivation. But the problem is it's not motivating like good results. It just looks like a guy has sour grapes right now and might be a sore loser, and that's not a great look for the university.
Yeah, I would say this like kind of like in conclusion, like if there's any head coach you're looking at in the Big 12 who's next to go, it's him. And we did this the other day on Big 12 today on Sirius XM. I asked the question, over under 1.5 coaches, gone was the term I used, and this would just account for firing, for them taking another job at the end of the year. And I hit the over. I was saying, go on the over. Well, Matt Wells is one. And we could see 3, depending on what happens with Matt Campbell. But look, I think if they go 4-8, they have to make a move. They should make a move because, it's not acceptable. And yeah, people always say, somebody would comment like, oh, who are you going to get? There are plenty of viable options out there, to you. If you go and do the research, you can find qualified people to go and take the job. Hell, you could probably Sonny Dykes away from SMU, right? He's succeeding in the same Metroplex that you got your program in. I'm sure he'd jump ship to go and take a job at a place like TCU. It's back in the Power 5 and, another place where you can, poach guys from different places. So I'm kind of the mind that they're going to have plenty of options if they hit the market. It's a desirable job.
It is. And I mean, I think you look at it like this too, going into making that leap to the Big 12. One thing that a lot of fans thought that was an advantage for them is, okay, we're probably not going to be the most talented team most weeks, but at least most weeks we have a better coach.
Mm-hmm.
And now you start to look at the landscape. Like he's 0-3 against Neil Brown. He's 0-2 against Chris Kleiman. We'll see what happens this week. He's never beaten Lincoln Riley. He's 500 against Mike Gundy. Like the guys he's had most success against, Matt Wells is now gone. The kind of revolving door at Baylor, which seems to sort of stabilized, at least right now, with Dave Aranda. It's not the advantage that it used to be. And yeah, it is a risk. Like it's a risk to let him go. It is, because you don't know. He's been there for 20 something years. You don't know who you're getting next. But better than 4-8 is not a super high.
Yeah, I would say I'm actually not even sure how much of a risk it is. Like I understand what you're saying because of the pedigree, but like if the recruiting is going to be like this the last couple of years, the way it has been, and also the results are like this, is it much of a risk? You know what I mean? I mean, he's,
yeah, I guess it's just going in a different direction, which is something
right.
I haven't done.
No, I understand. Yeah, I understand what you mean. Yeah. All right, I'm sure we'll have more about this in TCU Corner tomorrow night, but I'm just thinking now after today, like, is GP the next to go? And this trajectory, I feel like he should be. Steven, plug the show. Where can people find you and your work?
Well, as you see on that great graphic there, I'm at Simcox Steven on Twitter. The show is at Locked On TCU on Twitter, and it's Locked On Horned Frogs. Find it wherever you get your podcast.
All right, Steven Simcox, Locked On Horned Frogs. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Josh.